Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to talk you through hopefully quite a short video on the variables affecting conformity. Now, this is in response to the specification which asks us to look at group size, unanimity, and task difficulty. Now, in the previous video, I spoke about Asch's research, and we see that it was quite an interesting piece of research back in the 1950s, where he got a group of Confederates to kind of believe, to say that they saw a line to be a different length to what the participant would have been, and it was testing for an obvious kind of right or wrong answer. Now, something obviously about variations, and this is where Asch himself does the research, and he changes a certain variable within his own research. And the key to this is to find out what happens. Okay, and so what we need to bear in mind with each of these variations is there's a baseline measurement. Okay, so we had roughly, I'm going to kind of summarize it to about 37% of the critical trials there was conformity, and so therefore we can look at whether the variable changed conformity to be more positive or to be more negative than the 37%. Okay, so let's look at the variables that they ask us to have a look at. Group size. Now, this is not to be confused with crowds, because crowd behavior is something which psychologists have been interested in for absolute kind of centuries almost, and so therefore it's still interesting, and we would like to understand why groups that are very large act in a particular way. But we're looking at a context of Asch's experiment, whether the group was smaller or bigger, whether conformity increased or decreased. And what we find is that we do need to have at least a group. So it says one or two Confederates did not produce significant levels of conformity. So in other words, when there's just two people in the entire group, so to speak, one is the Confederate, one is a participant, the conformity levels were negligible. Similarly, when there's two Confederates with one person, once again, negligible. But it says here, when there were three Confederates, when suddenly we go to a group of four, conformity rises to 31.8%. This is rising from kind of negligible results. However, this is still below the 37%, but it's not that far away. So we could find that, all we need is a group of four people before conformity becomes significant. Now, this shouldn't be too much of a surprise if you've kind of looked into the sheriff research, because he had groups of four, and he found that all his participants did actually conform to the group of four. However, what happens when that group goes to 5, 6, 7, 8, and so forth and so on? What they found was that the conformity didn't change much. So it didn't make much of a difference to have 5 Confederates or 6 Confederates or 7 Confederates. But it says here, at one point, when the group becomes large, now he doesn't say what number that is, but basically it's going to be kind of maybe 15, 16, kind of a big group. It says that the conformity reduced. Now it doesn't say what it reduced to, but it was certainly lower than the 30% that we were expecting, or the 37% we were expecting. And it says here, because they suggest that collusion was going on. So in other words, the participant, when the group was too big, and of course we got person after person who's a Confederate saying, no, I think it's line B, it's line B, it's line B, it's line B, it's line B. Keep on going. Then they think, hang on, something's funny going on here. And that's what collusion is. You think that they are colluding against you. And that at that point, that's when conformity would drop. So maybe what we can say about the variable of group size is that a small majority doesn't exert any significant influence on us, but of course we don't need a huge majority before we feel the effects of group size. The next variable that they looked at was unanimity. Now, I have to just remind you that actually there's more than these three variables that Asch would have looked at, but these are the three that they're asking us to focus on. Now, we all understand what it is to be unanimous. If all of you stand up and leave the room, you are leaving the room as a united group. That's what unanimity is all about. And so what we find in the original study, it said that the Confederates were unanimous. Okay, so if the choice of the line was ABC, everyone said that the answer was A, except for obviously the participant was seeing what they were going to say. But what happens if somebody who appears to be part of the group changes their response? Asch had a chance to look at this. So let's watch a video and we can actually have a look and see what is going on.
But an experiment is not a public opinion poll. It examines behavior under the pressure of social forces, as the experiment of Solomon Asch reveals.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the fifth person with the white T-shirt. The others are Confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2, 2, 2,
2,
2, 3, 3, 3,
3.
But on the third trial, something happens.
2, 2,
2.
2,
2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
1,
Asch found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
1,
1.
They must be right. There are 4 of them and 1 of me.
1,
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1.
1,
1.
2, 1, 2, 2, 2,
I know they're wrong, but why
2,
should I make waves?
2,
In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. Here, the distortion.
Okay, so nothing is different from what we've seen before in terms of Asch's experiment. What the video has demonstrated is quite clearly that the participants may conform for different reasons. So now the second half of this video does kind of start looking at okay, let's look at some of the variations. Now I'm going to show you all the variations. Not all of them are relevant to us.
Distortion is at the level of his response.
2, 2, 2, 2,
In the previous experiment, the naive subject stood alone against the group. In this variation, Asch gave the naive subject a partner, here seated in the third position, who also gives the correct response.
1,
1.
2,
1.
2,
With a partner, yielding drops to only 5% of the critical trials compared to 37% without a partner. Although subjects report warmth and good feeling toward the partner, they typically deny that he played a role in their own independence. The partnership variation shows that much of the power of the group came not merely from its numbers, but from the unanimity of its opposition. When that unanimity is punctured, the group's power is greatly reduced. Sometimes we go along with the group because what they say convinces us they are right. This is called informational conformity. But sometimes we conform because we are apprehensive that the group will disapprove if we are deviant. This is called normative conformity. The strength of the normative factor is shown in another variation carried out by Asch. In this variation, the subject is told that because he had arrived late, he would have to write his answers. Subjects in this private response experiment are exposed to the same amount of misleading information as other subjects, but they are immune from any possible criticism by the group.
1.
1.
1.
And this enormously reduces the pressure to conform. Conformity drops by 2/3. Asch's experiment is a classic. It reveals how people will deny what they see and submit to group pressure. It allows us not only to observe conformity, but to study the conditions that increase or reduce its occurrence.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. I like the way that they do show that we conform for different particular reasons, and they certainly do show the unanimity example. What we see there is that in Asch's variation, what you're going to find is that he plants one of the confederates in the experiment to give a different answer to the group. Okay, so it says here that it's not necessarily the correct answer. So in a situation of 1, 2, 3, the correct answer may be 1, the group says 2, and even if the confederate says 3, it says here the presence of the dissenting confederate reduced conformity. And that's really quite important. And in that video, it kind of showed you that they didn't kind of feel that the reason that they were able to challenge the group was because of the other person. But we'll look at this in terms of social support. There's definitely something to that. Now, this percentage here of 25% is basically saying, okay, so look at all the critical trials and we see less conformity in total. We've got 37% in the original study, now we have 25. So we know that if the group are not unanimous, the chances are that we are less likely to conform. Unanimous being in that they conform to, that the group is unanimous. So it says the presence of a dissenter enabled the naive participant to behave more independently. And this is a bit of an explanation as to why there is a reduction in the conformity rates when there's a dissenter. And of course, this is because the majority were not unanimous. The final variation that they ask us to look at is task difficulty. And I suspect we already know the answer to this. We've seen from Lucas et al. That as the maths problems got harder, the person was more dependent on information from the group. So that was something which is very similar to this particular variation. So this is the second opportunity for us to go back to our notes and the peak paragraph on informational social influence this time and use Asch as an example of showing how when the task gets more difficult, the participants conform more. So what he did this time is instead of the lines being really obvious in terms of their lengths, he kind of made them quite similar. And what he showed was that he said conformity increased when the task got more difficult, and we can attribute this to informational social influence. Now, those are the variations that we have, and definitely worth having a look at. Just to finish this particular video, I just want to show you one last thing. And this is a question. It's an 8-mark essay, and it simply says, outline Asch's findings in relation to 2 variables affecting conformity. Okay, so this was an actual question that came up in an exam based on the new specification. It was an AS exam, so therefore it's one of the reasons why it's an 8-marker, but of course it could be a 16-marker. So what they want you to do is to be able to outline 2 variables, and you can choose them, and explain how it affects conformity, and then to evaluate that. Now, of course, I don't have any actual evaluation points in this particular slide, because you need to go back to this particular video, you need to go back to the previous kind of section in your notes where we are being critical of Asch, and we can look at something like A Child of Its Time, or the validity of the Asch's research, both in the participants kind of being convincing and also in the reality of a lab, could really kind of give us enough points to be critical in this particular case. I hope you did enjoy the video, and I trust that you're finding these videos helpful. I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much. Good night.